Welcome to another exciting episode of Brewed for Change, an initiative of Green Frontier Capital, a pioneer in investing in innovative companies that are aligned with India's sustainable goals. My name is Sandiip Bhammer, and I'm your host for today's episode. I'm also the founder of Green Frontier Capital, and I'm extremely excited. In fact, this is going to be one of our best episodes ever because we have the honor and privilege of hosting Mr. Amitabh Kant, a visionary leader and a massive influence on India's economic and sustainable development. First, of course, in his earlier position as CEO of NITI Aayog and currently as India's Sherpa to the G20. Join us on this episode to talk to Mr. Kant, a visionary who's shaping India's future in the areas of policy, innovation, and transition to a green economy. Thank you, Mr. Kant, for being with us today.
Great
really
pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Wonderful.
I'm actually going to start my questions with a little bit of a deja vu. Can you talk to us a little bit about your journey to your current position and also your inspiration of interest in the areas of economic planning and economic policy?
Well, I studied in Delhi at St. Stephen's College, and then those days, there were very few opportunities. Either you joined the government or you joined the private sector. There was no startup movement in India, so I ended up sitting for the exam because my family had a lot of civil servants, and I ended up in the backwaters of Kerala. And then I worked in the traditional fisheries sector with fishermen and brought in new technology for them. They could go much further into the sea with outboard motors, new fishing nets, which are then known as disco nets, and we got them fiberglass crafts. For fisherwomen, we provided new buses, which were only for fisherwomen, so that they could go into the city, much easier with their baskets of buses. But one of the challenges we faced was that there was, opening their bank accounts was a nightmare because fishermen were prone to drinking. And those days, we used to chase physical bank managers. It used to take 6 to 7 months to know your customer and open a bank account. Today in India, we open a bank account in less than a minute using biometric. And that is the transition I've seen in my career. But then, a little later, I ran into a major problem with the communist government in Kerala. I was without a job for about 10 months. And I thought that was the end of my career. And, the government, as a punishment posted me as Secretary Tourism in Kerala. Nobody had heard of Kerala. People used to go to either Kashmir or Rajasthan. But I used that opportunity to turn around Kerala as a great destination. And what I did was to open up new products, the backwaters of Kerala, the Ayurveda of Kerala, the houseboats. I went back to the roots of Kerala, promoting their traditional martial art, Kalripet, their Kathakali, Mohiniyattam were brought back. And then we promoted the traditional Kerala cuisine, which nobody had heard about, appam and stew and, fish moili and all that. And we differentiated Kerala from the rest of the world and said that this is very unique. And soon after that, National Geographic actually rated us one of the 10 exotic paradises of the world. And Kerala became a great destination. We took it from $20 to a $500 a night destination. And then, one fine day, I was relaxing at home. I got a call from the Prime Minister's secretary that the Prime Minister, Mr. Vajpayee, wanted to have a holiday in Kerala. He came and spent about 10 days in Kerala, in Kumaragam, in the backwaters. And, Kerala really got onto the world map of tourism. And, from there, I was picked up. Actually, on that time, the principal secretary was there, and he told Prime Minister that we should bring this boy to Delhi to drive India tourism. And the Prime Minister looked at me and said, "Have you applied for Delhi?" I said, "No, I've not applied." So he said, "Mat apply karna. Agar apply karoge, to ye Brijesh Mishra ji tumko tourism ke badle women and child welfare mein bhej denge." So we all laughed and finished with it. I applied 1.5 years later. I was to go to Finance Ministry. But Mr. Brajesh Mishra called me up and said that, you remember that conversation, and we'll post you to tourism. So there was no vacancy. They created a job and posted me. And soon after that, we had an attack on our parliament. We had crisis in Afghanistan. There were travel advisories against India. Our hotels were just doing 10% occupancy. And at the peak of that crisis, we launched that incredible, when every other destination had stopped its marketing, we launched the Incredible India campaign. And that's how we built India as a great, incredible destination, going back again to yoga, Ayurveda, meditation, many other things. So I've been more like a startup entrepreneur in government.
That's fantastic. So obviously you've achieved so much in the time that you've spent in government. Looking back, what would you say has been your most significant contribution? You've done a lot at NITI Aayog, now of course as Sherpa to the G20, prior to that the Kerala tourism mandate. Which is the closest one to your heart?
So, the greatest job satisfaction I got was in running this program for 115 of the most backward districts of India. We didn't call them backward. The Prime Minister called them the aspirational districts of India. We identified outcomes, 49 outcomes relating to health, education, nutrition, and transforming the lives of citizens in these districts. And all we did was to track data on a real-time basis, on a minute-to-minute basis, and we started ranking these districts. And we put young collectors in these districts. We put young health officers, young medical officers, young teachers. We ensured that all the vacancies were filled up in these districts. And we started ranking them and putting it in public domain. And we said that these districts are the best performers, these districts are the worst performers. And every month we used to put this ranking out. And we started naming and shaming them. And we said that competition really transformed these districts.
And accountability.
And accountability. So the people started questioning the collectors, and people started questioning the elected representative as to why they are not performing in these outcomes. And within a period of 2 to 2.5 years, these districts actually started performing much better than the better off districts. And I could see transformation on ground happening before my eyes. And therefore, aspirational district program gave me great job satisfaction, because this was about transforming lives. This was transforming, the quality of citizens living in some of the most far-flung and the most backward districts of India.
Great. Before I came to do this interview with you, I actually spoke to many of the youth in India and talked to them about who their role models were, especially when we talk about economic planning, economic policy. And what was interesting is that your name came up all the time. And obviously, therefore, you've actually set a really great benchmark for young people in India to follow. While growing up yourself, who did you basically have as a role model?
Well, my objective always has been that, when I was growing up, there was a lot of tech innovation happening. And, there was Steve Jobs and there was Bill Gates, but what I've tried to do is to keep abreast of reading all the time to see what trends are taking place and how transformation is taking place. And I've been a great believer that actually, in India, if India is to grow at rapid rates in many areas, we have to technologically leapfrog. It will not be possible for India to grow at high rates. We need to grow at high rates of 9 to 10% for the next 3 decades or more. Year after year, because the compounding power of growth will actually enable the per capita income to rise. And that can only happen if you are able to absorb the best technology and grow and expand. And one of the good things that's happened in India is that, if you look at the last 2 decades, all innovation in the Western part of the world have happened because of Google. They've happened because of Apple, Amazon, Meta, and in China because of Tencent and Alibaba. India created a different model. India created the digital public infrastructure. We created identity for all Indians. And then on top of that, we allowed private sector to compete. So in India, Google Pay competes with, Phone Pay, and Paytm competes with WhatsApp in the marketplace. But what happened was that between 2015 to 2017, we opened 550 million bank accounts. Every second bank account opened in the world was opened in India. And Indian women had only 18% of the bank accounts. Indian women had, 18% of the women had bank accounts. Today, about 95% of the women have bank accounts. And then we linked up identity, both your Aadhaar and your mobile number was linked to the bank account.
Sure.
So India actually does 46% of the real-time payment in the world, all on mobile, using QR code.
I actually read a very interesting statistic the other day in the newspapers that 23 billion apps were downloaded in India in 2023.
Yeah. 23.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's, so India has the highest number of app downloads. But then, as a consequence of those fast payments, what's happened is that the ecosystem that we built up, then you had a number of young startups, young unicorns, all of them unicorns now. You look at MobiQuick, you look at Pine Lab, all of them, what did they do? They started doing cashless, paperless lending. Mm-hmm. And then you had another set of young startups. You had, Zerodha, Grow, Upstock. They took wealth creation to Tier 2, Tier 3 cities, to rural areas. And actually, wealth creation started happening there. They took stock market there to Tier 2, Tier 3 rural areas. And Zerodha, Grow, Upstock are all young unicorns.
Absolutely.
And then you had another set of young startups. You had Go Digit, Acco, all these. They started giving insurance. So, when I was growing up, it used to take me 6 months of paperwork with LIC to get an insurance. They give insurance in 1 minute flat. So India does cash transactions in 30 seconds. India does stock market in 30 seconds. India does insurance in 1 minute. That's the technological leapfrogging India has done. This has not happened in Europe. This has not happened in America. In America, I've not used my credit card or been to an ATM machine for over 4 years now.
Yes.
In America, I had to use my credit card because to hire a vehicle when I visited my daughter. India did 2.2 billion COVID vaccination, all paperless, cashless. In America, my daughter all used paperwork. So India is technologically leapfrogged.
Absolutely. Switching gears for a bit to a subject that's closer to us as a climate change investor is how do you view India's current economic landscape, and how much do you think climate change as an area is going to have an impact on India's economy and future development?
So I think it's a huge opportunity for India because the disruption happening because of climate change. And though we've not occupied carbon space, 85% of the carbon space has been occupied by the developed world. We've occupied only 1.5% of the carbon space. On a population basis, per capita basis, we should be entitled to 17.5%. But India must become the first country in the world to actually industrialize and urbanize without carbonizing. So India's huge advantage is that in the next 5 decades, we'll do huge urbanization. We'll see 500 million people getting into urbanization. We'll be creating many cities like we are doing now. We'll be manufacturing in a big way in the coming years. The challenge is that we must do this through a process of decarbonization. Mm-hmm. It's possible only in India because we are climatically blessed. No other country in the world has a climatic condition which India has. The only other country which has that is Saudi Arabia, but that is full of fossil fuel. So India should do more and more and more and more of renewables. But even if you do 100% of your electricity by renewable, that's 20% of your energy. That balance 80% is refinery, steel, cement, fertilizer, long-distance transport. We need to decarbonize all that. These are all hard-to-abate sectors. And India should use renewable energy at low cost to crack water, produce green hydrogen, and become the global champion of green hydrogen. We should become the largest producer of green hydrogen and export it in its liquid form, ammonia. And today, the cost of production in India is $4.5 per kilogram. Our objective should be that by 2030, we should be able to produce green hydrogen at $1 per kilogram. And with that, we today spend about $180 to $200 billion on imports of fossil fuel. We should be an exporter of energy by 2047, and that will make India a complete champion of climate change.
Sure. Critics have obviously brought up the point that India needs to balance the need for economic growth with the need for sustainability. Where do you see the view on India as far as both these issues are concerned?
So my belief is that you can't grow till you don't disrupt. If you need to grow for 3 decades, you need to be a champion of green hydrogen. You need to be a champion of electric vehicles. Mm-hmm. You need to do this not for growing, but for improving the quality of life of your citizens because of the air quality. India, 8% of India's GDP comes from the automobile sector. There's a global disruption taking place. Everybody is moving to EVs. If India sticks with combustion engines, India will be outcompeted in the world. So we need to transition from 200 parts to 20 parts by moving to electric vehicles. India should go 100% two-wheelers, three-wheelers, all of them must go EV by 2030. India should have no combustion two-wheelers, three-wheelers by 2030, according to me. And my view is that the market will drive that. And India should push for electric buses in all its metro. I think we have about close to 54,000 buses. All of them in the next 4 to 5 years should be made to go electric. What will happen as a consequence of that is that you will become the champion of the world in two-wheeler manufacturing, three-wheeler EV manufacturing, two-wheeler EV manufacturing, and automobile bus manufacturing. And the other big thing that's happening is on four-wheelers. Tatas have already taken the lead in EV. So if companies do not go EV on four-wheelers, then they lose market share. And therefore, my view is that everybody will be forced to go electric. This is inevitable. So the earlier India does it, the better it is.
Sure. A lot of people would say that these are steps towards mitigating climate. Yeah. And maybe part of it is towards adapting towards climate. But what steps do you think India needs to take to basically build long-term adaptation and resilience capability?
So, I've been a long-term believer that, there are several things India needs to do. I mean, like we're pushing for biofuel. We're pushing for green hydrogen. But one of the key things which the Prime Minister has talked about is lifestyle for environment, the life movement. Yes. That behavioral change is also very critical in the Indian context, that we put on our lights, we put on our water taps on, we waste a lot, we throw garbage on the road. So circular economy is very, very critical in India's context. Extended producers' responsibility and pushing for circular economy in many key areas is very important.
How have international climate agreements and global policies shaped India's stance towards climate change?
So, we need to become a climate warrior, not for the sake of the world. We need to do it for our own sake. Mm-hmm. And my view on that is that we committed to agreements in Paris, COP21. We far exceeded that. We are the only G20 country which has achieved 185 gigawatt of renewables. We achieved our renewable target almost 9 years ahead of schedule. None of these G20 countries have achieved it. India has achieved it. India has put very, very strong targets before itself in terms of renewables, in terms of green hydrogen mission, in terms of circular economy, in terms of pushing for 20% of ethanol in its biofuel mission. Mm-hmm. Many, many things India has pushed very radically forward. We negotiated on many of these issues in G20. This was the first time that India pushed for a Green Development Pact, saying that the world should triple its renewable energy. double its energy efficiency. We pushed for a new framework for hydrogen. We pushed for biofuel alliance, all as a part of a Green Development Pact, which was agreed by all the countries in G20.
Okay. Mr. Kant, are there any climate initiatives that you yourself have personally been involved with?
Well, I've from NITI Aayog, I drove the electric vehicle movement and
yes.
In a very big way. I pushed for the PLI, the production-linked incentive for battery, because I strongly believe that battery storage, both on electricity side and this is very important on vehicle side. And I pushed for green hydrogen in a very big way. And my belief is that that is the fossil fuel of the future.
And what do you think about the concept of urban planning in the context of climate change? What do you think India should do or is doing in that area?
Ensure that every city that we make is transport driven. It should be public transport oriented. We should not ape the West. When the West was urbanizing, it made cities based on vehicles, on cars, and therefore you have 1,200 cars per 1,000 people in United States. You have 850 cars per 1,000 people in Europe. India's got a huge advantage because it has only 21 cars per 1,000 people. It doesn't have legacy issues.
Sure.
It can leapfrog into a completely new model of public transport-based development. So buses, metros, rapid transport systems around which completely new urbanization must take place. And urbanization must be around public transportation.
Sure. And
far more denser, far more vertical.
Absolutely. And how much of a role do you think education and public awareness plays in, basically the climate change issues getting addressed by a nation?
Huge.
And what do you think the government is doing here to do that?
See, no change is possible without taking citizens. No change is possible without creating public awareness. Extension, mass communication, public awareness. Citizens must become a part of the change. That is, to my mind, the key. Much of what India has achieved in digital transformation has been possible because of awareness. Much of what India has achieved in women development has been because of awareness. So without creating citizens' awareness, you will not be able to do it.
And your thoughts on the startup ecosystem addressing climate change in India?
So let me first talk about the startup movement, because when we started in 2016, the startup movement, we just had about 156 startups. Today we have about 110,000 startups. We have about 115 unicorns. Many of them have disrupted. And many of these, which I named and talked about, they're all national assets because of the backbone India created. And similarly, you're seeing a huge amount of disruption taking in last mile connectivity, in mobility, many other areas, which is all happening because of young disruption happening because of young entrepreneurship. And therefore, I'm very, very optimistic. I really feel that in the area of climate, you will see a vast amount of disruption taking place. You see people like Athro on recycling. You see Loham on recycling. You see Blue Smart. You see many of these young people doing phenomenal work on mobility. They're path-breaking young entrepreneurs. And, all these are really disrupting the traditional way of life to a much better way of life in terms of climate change.
Great.
I mean, if you look at renewables, the whole movement has been driven by India's private sector. India is the only country where private sector drove India's achievement of 185 gigawatt. And if you look at green hydrogen, young companies are driving it. Look at Acme, look at Greenco, look at Renew. All these are young companies. Nobody had heard of them a few years back. They're all doing pump storage. They're all doing electrolyzers. They're all doing cutting-edge technologies.
Sure. So our program is actually watched by a lot of investors from abroad, our LPs, and of course, the public here. And a lot of startups also watch our show. What advice would you give to young startups that are actually building out their businesses in the climate change space? Capital has not been easily available. The venture cap world has been, for use of a better term, sort of dry at best over the last 2 years. And there are a lot of disappointed young entrepreneurs who've given up lucrative jobs to basically go in and do something exciting, change the world. What kind of advice would you give to them?
So India is still attracting a lot. We are attracting close to about 28 to $30 billion in the startup movement. At the peak, we attracted $45 billion. And I think you will see a lot of drive towards resources flowing in once the global economy improves.
Yep.
And I'm quite sure that India, with its growing story, we have a very young population. Our average age is 29. Even in 2047, when we become 100, we'll be the youngest country in the world. And therefore, young people, they're all baby boomers and they're all going to disrupt. They're all going to get into new areas of growth. There's no other country in the world which is growing at such a rapid pace. There's no other country which has such great aspirations. There's no other country which has carried out such massive reforms. There's no other country which has grown its infrastructure investments by 592% in the last 5 years. And therefore, the infrastructure that we have created will accelerate the pace of growth of India's economy. And actually, India will, in due course, attract a lot of capital. And you will see a lot of young Indian startups actually pushing for transformation, particularly in the sphere of climate. And I think there's no other country which has the energy, the vibrancy, and the dynamism of young India, which India has. And therefore, India will be one country which will drive climate action in a positive manner. I mean, I'm seeing every country in G20. No other country has that energy which India has.
Yeah, to that point, I'm based right now in New York, and a lot of Indians had actually moved to the US in the 60s and 70s to give their family a better life.
Yeah.
What's really interesting is a lot of their kids who grew up in the States want to come out back to India while their parents are going to continue to stay in the United States. So they're really excited about the prospects of coming back to India and doing something interesting.
So don't waste your time there. The future is here, not in the United States.
Last question. What's next for you, sir? And what are you truly passionate about from here? What are you going to do?
So I'm going to read, I'm going to write, I'm going to travel, I'm going to discover India. I've yet to travel in different parts of India. So I'll do that in the next couple of years.
Great. It's an honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining us on Brewed for Change.
Thanks.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.